Where's the, is the mic on? Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to session 4.3, Building Expertise in Clean Energy Investment. Good to see a few of you in the room, even early on the fourth day of ASEF. My name is Peter Story. I'm the Global Coordinator of Private Financing Advisory Network, or PFAN. That's a project preparation facility, and we have supported in various ways about 1,400, if not more, projects, small and medium, globally over the last 17 years or so, raising something like $3.3 billion of investment along the way. So we think we know something about project development and getting investment into them, but we're learning all the time, as all of us are. I think my opening remarks today, what I'd like to do is just sort of talk you through where I see the sort of the environment at the moment, or where we as a panel see the environment, and try and set up the discussion. I think looking at some of the other sessions that we've had this week, what we're seeing is increasing professionalization in the project development and investment process, especially over the last 10 years. But nonetheless, project investment, project development remains really challenging and quite daunting. We have long lead times. I think developers struggle to access the investment runway, the seed capital that they require. And for a successful project development through to investment, you're having to integrate a huge number of challenging disciplines. You've got to do a lot over a long time. You've got to coordinate a lot to get where you need to get the money and actually build and commission and then start operating your plant. And that's a huge opportunity cost and a huge real cost in terms of your time and effort. I think as a community, we have developed a huge number of tools to enable and facilitate that process, and we're getting much, much better at integrating those tools. But nevertheless, we're still finding it a challenge to really integrate them and to make the path of the developer easy, smooth, and quick, I suppose, is what we're really trying to achieve. Still quite overwhelming and challenging for developers to access this process. And we're going to be hearing some of that today from the presentations that we've got. So I think one of the things I would say that we need is more integration in this project development process. There's many tools out there, but how do we integrate those tools? How do we coordinate them better? And how do we make them more accessible for the people that need them? Where do we need them? And how do we mobilize those tools? The other thing that's been happening, I suppose, is the rate of technology change. And that's having a huge impact on the way that we approach development. And we're going to be hearing about that from Jason a little bit later. But despite the fact that we have this rapid technology chain, and then having to deal with new technology value systems coming into play, our assumption as a panel today, and having listened to some of the other presentations, particularly in track 4 over the last week or so, our assumption as a panel is a bit that we actually have most of the tools available that we need. We know what it takes to develop the projects that we need to develop to meet the transition goals, to meet the SDGs, and to move to net zero. We're not doing it quick enough. We're not getting the money necessarily really where it needs to get to, so it's still, some of the money is going to the wrong places. And it's not happening fast enough. So the questions are not so much how do we, I think we know the expertise that we need is our thesis this morning, but we're not doing it quickly enough. We need to do more of it, and we need to make sure that the money that we do deploy goes to the right places, whatever the right places might be. I'd just like to test that thesis before we dive into the presentation. Who agrees with that? Do we have the tools? Are they there? And is it just a question of scale and moving it faster? Or do we have other problems? Yes, no, yes first. Show of hands. So I can see them. The panel agree, or some of the panel agree at least, about half. And no? Nobody has a no. Tom has a no. That's bad. Take Tom off the panel. No, great. So we have a bit of discussion to get through on the panel. We have some discussion, some convincing to do within the audience. But I think that's what we're going to be trying to look at today, not so much how we build the expertise. The expertise is there. We need to improve it. We need to make it go quicker. We need to access it more easily. We need to reduce the cost of it. So that's really the thesis that we're going to be looking today. We're going to be looking at 5 examples of this and try to understand through those 5 examples how we can make more of this happen, how we can make it happen more easily. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Siddhartha Keshavaza, I think, if I've got the pronunciation right, who's going to talk us through a project in Bhutan, solar project, large-scale project, and how they approach putting that project together, the technical assistance and the various other things that they brought to the table to make that project happen and de-risk it. Siddhartha is an associate director at Nangia & Co. Siddhartha, over to you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Peter, for getting my name correct. Starting with the entire theme of my presentation is, what are the quick steps which a government need to adopt in order to attract the investments at a scale, at a pace, and in a timely manner. What will happen if not is probably something which we do not want to know. Start with, it is about a 50 megawatt solar power plant, which is in the latest, in the advanced stages of pre-construction. We are here almost at the stage of signing the agreement and a definitive commercial agreement between the investor and the government. So let us understand how the Bhutan sector is and what are the perspectives from the outside world on Bhutan. One is reliance on hydropower. 99% of it is from hydro. It actually suffers seasonal deficits, and then it's a hilly terrain, and you actually never know if you have the land for solar power projects or renewable energy power projects apart from hydro. The second one is it's highly G2G, government to government projects, and the FDI policy is also very recent one. And the PPP policy is again not so old. And the biggest of all is their debt to GDP ratio, which is not again in very good shape. And then you have got the institutional gaps, regulatory gaps. You never know what's the right tariff. You have the experiences from India, Nepal, China, but then they may or may not be the right benchmarks to look at. And then you do not know if you have a right frameworks for integrating the variable renewable energy. And the last one is there is only one utility scale power plant, 23 megawatt, which is not commissioned yet as on March 31st, 2025. And then we do not know if they have the right protocols in place, because at the end of the day, a foreign investor comes in, they definitely want a land, a local infrastructure in place. So the interventions are, the first thing is you need solar. So it's a case for my investor that yes, fine. Solar basically do provide electricity across the year, at least in this part of the world. And then you also need some kind of de-risking mechanism where there is some ownership lies with the government utility, so which takes care of the lands, approvals, clearances, permits, and the other elements of FDI clearances. Then you need a bankable PPA with all the payment securities and all the risks addressed properly with a definitive obligations of each party. And then you need a regulatory boost, which actually, de-risks or, shift the risks between each parties. Otherwise, if there is a risk which is unattended, it is assumed to be at the investor's end and the risk premium goes up then by the tariff. The second one is HOTO, handover takeover support for the existing power plant. And then an investor comes with money, may with the experience of setting up a power plant, but when for a day-to-day O&M practice, we need the local staff to be coming. Probably a person from Sweden or Johannesburg or India or Australia may not be sitting there on day-to-day basis. You need the local staff to be doing that. And then the capacity building on the SCADA fault detections to ensure the long-term sustainability. At the end of the day, my financiers, both the debt financiers and the equity financiers, should be happy. Without which, if I do not make money once, I'll never invest in the place again. The third intervention and the final intervention is on having the maintenance protocols in place, digital tool adaptation, and then human capital development, which all and are again the de-risking elements for any first of its kinds projects in that particular geography. Though solar power projects are not new for Indians, Chinese, and the rest of the world, but then for Bhutan, they only have one project but not yet commissioned. So these interventions are kind of a couple of the like very low hanging interventions, but then across the value chain of any renewable project development, every aspect needs to be addressed. Anything unaddressed is an added risk. So my investor or any investor for that matter need all these points, around 25, 28 odd points, and then sub points of around 72 point checklist, which gives some kind of comfort. So let us try to understand the entire game in a pattern of theory of change, where you have got the problems, capacity to attract the investments from the private sector, inadequate risk allocations, not flexible PPPs, and in terms of the share allocations. Then you have got there is no good expertise on evaluating the technical designs. Uh, you do not know if your EPC contractor is doing the right work. You do not have the methodology to have a proper handover takeover mechanisms, and then you do not have O&M practices in place, because it's for them it's their first project. They are just trying to get up, crawl on their knees, and then probably trying to stand up. So you have got the activities, interventions which we have mentioned, and then ultimately, the impact would be Bhutan seen as a PPP-ready country with proper standards in place, disciplined design, execution, implementation, and post-implementation processes. And then when we have started this work, we have only one MOU in place, but then as we have completed this 2 months down the line, we have over $110 million of equity, which is funded, and out of which almost 10% already financed. And then which actually, combined with the debt component, their entire target of solar could be funded through these interventions. What exactly, is required, what exactly they have done. It's like strengthening their capacity to build investor confidence, having the regulatory frameworks, risk assessment frameworks, risk mitigation frameworks, and then ultimately investors now view that the country is not as riskier or as not as unknown as we earlier used to think. We know how their policies work and what is the way forward. We have a clear roadmap. So what are the lessons learned? The risks need to be addressed right from the site selection, clear land preparation. Then, private sector comes with fund and the initial EPC, but then the other parts of it, the local capacity should be available. Clear PPP frameworks, clear HOTO processes, clear preventive maintenance schedules, O&M. And then at the end of the day, it's speaking the language of the investors, without which none of the FDI happens. And the entire process can be replicated by the other emerging economies, other small island developing states. At the end of the day, the recommended steps is like, bundle the land projects, align grid operators readiness, and then institutionalize the maintenance schedules. Ultimately, my asset need to maintain for 25 years and it need to be done by the local stakeholders. This is the final slide of my presentation. So at the end of the day, understand the risk expectations, understand the risks, understand the returns expected by the investors for those risks, and then have a proper deal structure. Speak the language of the private equities and developers, and then enable institutional mechanisms that de-risk projects from day one. That's pretty much about me. pretty much about the presentation. Thank you, Peter.
Siddhartha, don't move for a second. Round of applause, please. Just one question following on that. What do you think would have been the sort of implications had the investment gone in without all of that framework being put into place? What's sort of the loss implication?
You definitely would have secured funding, but it may not have converted into financing. You have MOUs in place, but not agreements in place.
So you don't get a project, in other words.
You have the headlines, but not on projects on ground.
Yeah. So we see the importance, the real importance of doing all that upfront work and bringing all the TA to bear. Very good. A point of order, just on the question answers. Thank you, Siddhartha, thank you so much. We will be moving to a question and answer session after the presentations. I'm a bit old-fashioned. We will take questions on the app by all means, but we have come to Manila this week as people for an event. So I would like to have as many live questions from the audience as possible. It's up to you. We'll also read them on the app and we'll also reflect them on the app if you'd prefer to do it that way. But please consider if you can ask your questions live and we'll be delighted to take them. But also post them on the app if that's preferable to you. Moving along, I'd like to introduce Nisha Jaiswal, who is a senior program officer at Winrock International, working on a project in Nepal. We're going to the other end of the scale, so we've looked at megawatt scale. Now we're going to go off-grid and particularly look at the importance of involving the community in the pre-development work that you do and how critical that is for getting to project success. Nisha, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone, and namaste. I'm Nisha Jaiswal from Winrock International, Nepal, and I'm honored to share a story of transition, how Nepal's community-based microhydro system are being reimagined, not just to survive, but to lead in sustainable, resilient rural electrification. Today's session focuses on building expertise, and I hope this presentation brings forward insights on how local capacity, smart governance, and the right incentive can align to create an inclusive energy ecosystem. Let me begin with the story of Nisi 2 microhydro plant. It's a 100 kilowatt microhydro plant in Baglung, a place in Western Nepal. It once powered over 1,200 homes, running at low plant load factor. However, after grid arrival, it further reduced its operations, tariff collection dropped off, and the plant barely covered its operational cost. But this MSP user committee didn't give up. With support from Vision's Innovation Lab, European Union, GIZ, and Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund, they formed a cooperative, applied for viability gap funding, and initiated the process for grid interconnection. Through our project, we didn't treat it as a dying asset, we reimagined it as a livelihood ecosystem, integrating productive use enterprises, landscape management, and stronger governance. What started as a survival is now a replicable model, with 11 such cases already in motion and hundreds of such possibilities across Nepal. Past 30 years, MSP electrified rural homes, especially when grid access was below 20%. We have now 1,800 plus MSP nationwide, but today over 90% of Nepal has grid access. That's great news, but it created a paradox. Many rural households are connected to both grid and MSP, or worst, some of them has already abandoned the MSPs. So as a result, tariff collection drops, maintenance is delayed, and massive public investment is at risk. So we can think Is grid expansion a boon or a ban for rural communities? Taking the example of NISI2, grid interconnection proves to be a win-win solution across the board. For the country, it optimizes energy infrastructure. For Nepal Electricity Authority, it increases the share of renewables, especially during off-peak hours. And for communities, it creates a steady income stream, strengthens services, and revives local jobs. But there's a catch. As one community member said, that we'd rather let this infrastructure rust than hand it over to the outside profit makers. And this brings us to a deeper issues, the issues of governance and the issues of trust. Technically and policy-wise, we are in good place. We have national directives on net metering since 2018, grid interconnection procedure since 2021, and clear technical standards from NEA. Local government and Alternative Energy Promotion Center are on board, but accountability remains a challenge. Most MSPs are still operated by user committee. These models lacks commercial orientation, do not maintain financial audits, and are often resistant to reform, especially toward private or cooperative transition. This is where Vision's Innovation Lab stepped in with a safety mindset. Through action research across Banglung and Jumla district of Nepal, we reframed microhydro plant as ecosystem. We linked it to the energy, we linked it to the livelihood and landscape management. We assessed technical readiness, market potential, and community capacity building. We worked closely with NEA for approvals and supported MSPs in applying for SCCF viability gap funding. And we handled cooperatives through procurement, capacity building, slope protection, and enterprise incubation. This wasn't just a technical support, it was community-first restructuring. So what was the lesson learned? Through this journey, we have learned some important lessons. Policies help, but they are not enough. Sorry. Fund helps, but only when governance is ready. Technical support helps, but only if it's embedded over time. There is no one-size-fits-all model. That's what's needed is a mix of community-first design, flexible financing, long-term technical assistance, and transparent, inclusive governance. So what are the results and impacts? So NISI2 100 kilowatt microhydro plant, after grid interconnection, the downtime has reduced by 40% by grid sales. Similarly, the Chachalghat 100 kilowatt microhydro system, we have bioengineered the catchment area to prevent landslide, slope protections, and also negotiated revenue sharing model with NEA. Similarly, with Girindi MSP, that is 75 kilowatt, we have successfully retained the 1,070 consumers even after the grid arrival and demonstrated viability of community-first grid interconnection project. And our intervention aims to retain local ownership over MSP assessment and energy revenues. The other is build cooperative governance capacity and strengthen linkages between energy enterprise and landscape resilience. So why does this matter beyond Nepal? Because this model is rooted in ecosystem thinking. It is scalable to 1,800 plus MSPs across Nepal and relevant globally for off-grid system facing grid transitions over the world. Our key innovations are ecosystem thinking, that is linking energy with livelihood, forest, and equity. Similarly, community first, that is retaining local ownership of the MSPs while enabling grid interconnection. And the upgraded governance system, from users committee to cooperative model. The public-private cooperative synergy, building trust for long-term viability. This is what a just inclusive energy transition can look like. Thank you.
Thank you, Nisha. I mean, you've mentioned the opportunity. I mean, it's a great initiative, this, and it really, I think, sort of homes in on the importance of what to do in the sort of grid arrival situation to avoid mothballing of assets. And I think this is something in the energy access space we're going to be faced with a lot in lots of different ways coming in, and we'll talk about it later, perhaps in the discussion, in connection with the rate of technology change and development. But what does the scale up look like in this case? How do you get to those 1,800 and start doing them?
Yeah, actually, it's all about the funding, the availability of the viability gap. In our case, we don't propose to fund the 100% of the investment. So they are the part of share from the community, from the local government, and also from the donor. So that all make inclusive investment from the private sector, from the local government, from the central government, and also from the projects.
And what does the business case look like? What do the numbers look like?
Yeah, we have far more to go. So we have just started with 3 now from our projects. And as I said, we have to reach beyond 1,800. So among 1,800, so there are near about 200 MSP, which are of the above 50 kilowatt power. So maybe we can start from there from the 200, and then we can reach to other 1,800. Thank you.
Can you hold the question, please? Hold it. We will get back to it, sir. I promise you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
I'd like to move to the next presentation first, but another round of applause for Nisha. I'd like to move to our next presenter, Jason Occidental, from the university, and my screen has died here, so my notes have gone. From the university here in the Philippines, Department of Ateneo de Davao University. He's a professor at the Computing Engineering Department and also serving as Director of Innovation for the Technology Support Office. And Jason's going to talk to us really about the importance of technology decision making and how that drives the business case and also the investment case. Jason, over to you.
Right, thank you, Peter. So again, good morning, everyone. So I'm grateful to be here, not just for us to discuss this key topic on clean energy, but to be also given a chance as a researcher from the academe and as a young person in the energy sector. So today, I'm happy to share with you our research on marine inclusive hybrid renewable energy microgrids for coastal and islandic communities, as well as what our institution does to address concerns on energy poverty. So to begin, I'd like to share to you what the Philippines is all about, since we have our forum here, situated here in the Philippines. So it's an archipelago consisting of around 7,641 islands, 2,000 of which are habitable, according to National Geographic. And it also has around 36,000 kilometers of coastline. So given the statistics and placing it at an energy perspective, how can we electrify all these islands? So we'll look into some solutions, such as undersea cables to connect from the main grid. However, these are vulnerable due to the high cost, susceptibility to damage, and also the lengthy repair times whenever it breaks. So I'd like to put in a deeper focus the case of Samal Island. So Samal Island is located in the southern part of the Philippines. So it's a 2-hour flight in Manila and a 1-hour traffic from here to the airport. So it's a very beautiful island consisting of a lot of resorts, pristine beaches. However, this leads to a growing population. And with that growing population, there's also a growing demand for energy. So like any other island that is a bit far from the main grid of the country, it's connected via an undersea cable that's 2 kilometers long. And these cables are subject to constant cable breaks. So for the past decade, it has been subject to constant cable breaks. So usually, as reported, it's a 2-week fix, but it results into 6 months or even years of consistent blackouts. So with this, we are actually looking at alternative energy sources apart from the city or the island trying to address it with the investment of a diesel-powered generator. So they currently invested on a diesel-powered generator to address these consistent blackouts. But what we want to do as an academic institution and as a research institution is to look at potential renewable sources. So we are looking at solar energy and ocean energy technologies. So this is also to complement what the Mindanao Power Agenda has declared. By the year 2030, we would want to have a 50% share of renewable energy as well as 100% electrification. So this is a very big challenge, and we are still far from that. And we believe that further research and development, especially on renewable energy technologies, would help us address this target. So our institution has established the Center for Renewable Energy and Appropriate Technologies. So with emphasis on the term appropriate, because we are looking at renewable energy technologies that are fit in the locale of the Mindanao as well as other emerging economies. And eventually we were able to also expand our reach. So in 2019, we were able to establish the Mindanao Renewable Energy R&D Center with a grant from the Philippine government to promote collaborative R&D innovation. And in 2023, we also established MinReach, that is the Mindanao Renewable Energy Acceleration for Cooperation, to push policy lobbying. Because why focus only on R&D innovation? We also want to focus policy development so that we can push these technologies from the lab to daily use. So again, my focus for this morning's talk will be on renewable energy resource assessment. So we've done a lot of resource assessment all over Mindanao with the help of various institutions. So we have built up our expertise on assessment on photovoltaic, concentrated solar power, wind, as well as wave and tidal. So with the availability of this data, we are able to develop a knowledge base wherein we can create solutions and simulations on the data that we are able to collect. So let's look at one case example that we've developed in our research center. So we are able to collect solar PV data as well as tidal data in Pakiputan Strait. Now, that is the strait between the island of Samal as well as the main grid where the undersea cable is located. So we tried to create a load profile focusing on a very conservative around 10 kilowatt range that would power key infrastructure in the island. So we used Homer Energy as our simulation tool. Since it doesn't include wave energy, we have used the tidal, we have used the wind energy or wind turbine for the simulation purposes. So we've tried to develop 3 cases, one using PV and tidal, that is 100% renewable energy. So it uses a 20 kilowatt solar PV array and 2 5-meter turbines of 15 kilowatts. And we have also used PV and diesel for our second case. So that is 2 10-kilowatt generators and a 5-kilowatt PV array. And lastly, we've used PV and tidal as well as a diesel generator. So in this third case, we have tried to attempt a 99% renewable energy mix in this system. So in our results, we are actually able to see that neither a system that purely relies on renewable energy, and also a system that is fossil fuel based would be the most cost effective. So according to our simulation, we're able to see in terms of operating cost, net present cost, as well as the cost of electricity. Our third case, which is 99% renewable, fared as a competitive solution. So with that, we are able to see potential, especially in looking at clean energy solutions, especially in emerging economies where the energy demand is constantly increasing. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jason. I'm intrigued on the three scenarios you looked at. You haven't looked at storage. Is that something you can, why didn't you, I suppose, first question, and you know, have you looked at that, and what do you think the implications of that might be?
So that's a good question. So in terms of our expertise at the research center, there's not yet any expertise built up on storage, but we also looked into the potential of using batteries. But then in our previous experiences, investing in battery storage is quite expensive. So we also wanted an investment that's not very large, but we are actually also looking into traditional knowledge in a term of the use of water to store water and pumps to store that energy, so that we are also able to reduce costs and reduce the impact to the environment.
And the cost of storage is coming down dramatically all the time as we speak. So perhaps something for the future. So there we have, thank you. There we have a really great example of how the technology decision influences the investment decision. And I think Gilles is also going to help us look at some of these questions as to, one, what financial instruments we have at our disposal, and how we use them, and when we decide to use them, and also what we decide to finance. You know, Jason's been looking at the sort of what do we decide to finance from a technical point of view, but there are also financial considerations for this, and how do we measure then what is actually climate finance, and what climate finance contributes to what particular impact and development goals that we have. So Gilles is going to hopefully sort of enlighten us on that. Gilles has a banking and consulting background. He is currently a partner at EY for energy transition, working on the Partnerships for Infrastructure program, which provides technical assistance for infrastructure development, if I understand. But Gilles is going to tell us all about it. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning, everyone. So in the spirit of diversity at ASF, we've heard about micro initiatives, community level, small scale, off-grid. Now we're going to look about macro consideration and how do we enable the energy transition in the region. I apologize, I don't have nice picture of beaches. Thank you, Jason. But I have questions for you, and I'm going to ask not through the app. I will need you to raise your hand. So Peter mentioned I'm a partner at EY, but I'm here representing the Partnership for Infrastructure, which is an ODA program of the Australian government through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, and that's delivered in a consortium between DFAT, EY, TAF, the Asia Foundation, Adam Smith International, and Ninty1, who supports us on JETSI consideration. And P4I is a 5-year ODA program that's really promoting sustainable infrastructure in Southeast Asia. The program is actually coming to an end in December, but fear not, DFAT is working on the follow-on, which should start immediately after. Sheila is here from the DFAT and P4I here in the Philippines, so if after, based on what I say, if you need any support, please reach out to Sheila here. So promoting sustainable infrastructure across all of the sector, but to give you a couple of examples of what we've been working in Southeast Asia. One of the key topics has been to promote pumped hydro storage. Australia has very strong experience in the development of pumped hydro facility. We did a study with TNB research in Malaysia on the potential for pump hydro in Malaysia. The conclusion from the story was that the country today could be run 100% solar and pump hydro. And I'll repeat this. The system in Malaysia could be run 100% on solar and pump hydro. There is enough potential for sites for pump hydro, and there is enough land availability on solar. So if you start reimagining how could our electricity system be designed, pump hydro is not a new technology. It's been in existence forever, but it could be the perfect complement for solar. We've been doing other pieces of work on embedding sustainability for the state-owned utilities in Southeast Asia throughout the governance and helping them make better informed choices on how you redesign your electricity system. And in that context, as I mentioned, from micro to macro, we've been supporting a utility in the region to look at how do you finance grid investments. Now, you've heard from Nisha whether grid expansion is a boon or a bane. So, and I think you've heard throughout the week that grid investment is fundamental if we are to increase the penetration of renewables, all right? But grid investment per se is not exactly green. So if you look at sustainable finance solution, a grid, if you look at the taxonomy, it's not clear whether an investment in the grid is a green activity. So I have a couple of questions for you. Let's assume I'm the CFO of a utility in the region and you're the CEO of a bank. I have committed to be net zero by 2050. I have a plan that gets there, a transition plan, but that plan is not aligned with climate science. It's not aligned with the side SBTi. Would you subscribe to my bond? Can you raise your hand? So I am committing to net zero. I have a transition plan. It is not climate aligned. Would you give me the money? And there's no right or wrong answer. So please don't be afraid. There is no right or wrong answer to this. You would? Thank you, Peter. I get some money. Anybody else joining me? Yeah? Yeah. So it's really about what standards do we hold ourselves in Southeast Asia? SBTi or climate science is difficult. We are not ready for it, but we do need to unlock transition finance because some of the projects, if I want to do an off-grid, if I want to do a mini hydro, it's clear this is green. But at the same time, at the macro level, I need to invest massively in the grid. It's not necessarily green. Another question. I want to issue a sustainability-linked bond, right? And I'm going to use those proceeds to invest in the grid. I have chosen my KPI and my SPT, my sustainability performance targets, linked to the greenhouse gas emission. Because of legacy choices, my greenhouse gas emissions are increasing to 2030, but I need this money to invest so that in the long term, I can start decreasing. But over the next 5 years, my SPTs are actually going up, not down. Would you subscribe to the bond? Okay, a few hands. It is again, there's no right or wrong answer. It is very borderline. But I need money if I want to do better, if I want to transition. Another example, and that's the last one. So the grid, I'm going to use the money to invest in the grid. And I am telling you, I have done the technical study, I've done the environmental study. These investments are needed if I have to increase the penetration of renewables. But right now, the grid is connected to fossil fuel. When I invest, I'm going to get more emissions. I will unlock some transmission constraints. So again, short term, long term, would you subscribe to the bond? Yeah, so again, there's no right or wrong. That's the whole thing about unlocking transition finance. Green investments are green, there's no question, we need them. But we also need a lot of money that's borderline, and we need to define for us in ASEAN, what are the standards of transition finance? And if you look at the guidance, there's actually very little guidance. The ASEAN guidelines on transition finance are relatively vague. It doesn't really set. And I have taken utilities to meet with banks to discuss exactly this. And we've never had a clear answer. I think as a borrower, I'm terrified of issuing a product that I will be criticized because my KPIs are not ambitious enough. My transition plan doesn't stand the scrutiny to climate science. And you as a bank, you're also terrified of actually giving me the money because you don't want to be criticized either. So there's a really need to define what transition finance means in Southeast Asia. And I think we'll talk about this. So sustainable finance comes from different sources and in many forms. To the left, the national governments, philanthropic, and slightly as you move to the right, more towards commercial sources of financing, multilateral institutions like the ADB, bilateral institution. Then you get to development capital like CCEF, like Climate Finance Manager, microfinance, and so on and so forth. The question is, for your particular developments, for your particular project, which source is the right one at the right time? We talked about project preparation, so we need technical assistance. And then later on, once you get your projects off the ground, other sources of sustainable finance. Key lessons learned to unlock, build awareness and capacity. I think that's what we've done the entire week. Develop a clear, credible energy transition plan. And that's what we've been working through the P4I with the utilities around the region, and understanding the capital providers' requirements. What do the banks and others require? And that's not an easy one because banks have different requirements. You don't always get a clear, especially in the topic of transition finance. So there's been a few sessions this week on transition finance, which will be very important for us to scale up. Peter, do I get an Oscar for meeting the deadline of? I'm ready for my Oscar. I'm ready for my Oscar speech. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's have a good discussion.
Just explain a little bit more what P4I does. And, do you have some examples from there that sort of speak to this? Have you had investments that have gone ahead that you hadn't been expecting to go ahead, or ones that have gone the other way?
So the P4I works. So primarily works with government agencies, government departments around the region, around policy and project preparation. So really the upfront piece of the puzzle, not so much the downstream around, okay, let's go and bring a project to funding. So to give you a couple of examples, in the Philippines, we're currently working with the OTR around the transport plan. I mentioned the work on pump hydro storage in Malaysia. We are currently working with Sarawak on the Sarawak Energy around the potential on energy storage, whether it's pump hydro or lithium ion. What else, Sheila, can I mention? In Laos, we've been working on the technical standards for solar projects. Embedding sustainability was in Vietnam and Indonesia. We're working on maritime decarbonization in Thailand. So really across the entire infrastructure and more on the policy and early project preparation.
And how do people get to you? How do they find you? Who do they come to?
Yes, and I think it's the same around many other ODA programs, right? We've heard of it. Where do we go? Well, so the P4I hub is based in Bangkok. Sheila is a representative in the Philippines, and if you've seen the consortium, go to any of your friends at EY, the Asia Foundation, DFAT. Just look for the Australian flag, the embassy. You will find someone.
Again, hold the question, please. Sorry. Thank you, Gilles. So switching focus again, we're now going to look at the opportunity that public-private partnerships present for getting us along the project development curve and creating that excellence that we desire and addressing some of the challenges. I'd like to introduce Joao Jun. I hope I've got the name almost right. He also says he goes by the name of Tom Wang. He has 20 years of development experience working with Xinhua Finance Network of Asia in climate solutions, in the sort of communications and journalistic areas. Tom, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tom Wang. or Xiaojun, Peter actually pronounced it quite well. I say quite, yes. His was almost there. So I'm Chinese. I came over to the Philippines in 2018 to start a group called People of Asia for Climate Solutions. And my sharing is going to be very different because I don't have a presentation. I was working on the field. I was traveling around quite a few remote areas in the Philippines in different barangays. The word barangay here in the Philippines means the smallest local government unit or a village, pretty much a village. And also, as Peter introduced, I was a journalist. So today I'm actually going to tell you a story, as I always do. So I have lived in the Philippines for more than 6 years. And one of my favorite things to do is just to walk around different towns, different villages, different cities, and watch kids play. And the most popular sport in the Philippines is basketball. Whether there is a basket or not, like sometimes there's no basket, but as long as there is a ball or a bucket, kids actually make up a basketball game. And sometimes it's not even a basketball, right? It's probably a volleyball or any kind of ball, but kids love basketball games. And the most popular things you see in the Philippines is actually a basketball court. So what does that have anything to do with renewable energy here in this story? So in all these barangays, usually they have a basketball court. This basketball court is not just a place for kids to play their basketball games. It is also a place for sometimes a fashion show. Sometimes another favorite thing for the Philippines is actually a pageant show, right? There are a lot of like Miss this or Miss that kind of pageant shows. Or most of the time it is actually the barangay's hall where people meet and have their discussions. This is also sometimes the evacuation centers. When there is a storm or when there is an earthquake, when there is extreme weather events, people come over here for security, for safety. So this place is pretty much the center of a barangay. And in this case, pretty much the size of a barangay hall or the basketball court is this size. It's about somewhere between 300 and 400 square meters. And this could be easily converted into a small solar farm, right? This could easily be converted into a 50 to 60 kilowatt solar farm unit, solar generation unit. And most of the time, the barangays actually spend around 20,000 pesos on electricity bills. And that's quite a lot of money. And actually, we went into a barangay who owe more than 400,000 pesos in debt. They haven't paid their electricity bills because they just cannot afford it. So this is the case they're facing. This is the kind of investigation we were doing. And what do we do to help them solve the problem? We bring in a Chinese company, a solar company, who is trying to establish new markets or to penetrate new markets. And they have a lot of solar panel or solar equipment supply is there. And what do we do with the local government here? We find a local business person who actually knows the rules of the game quite well and also who can do the calculation. So with a loan of enough solar equipment to build a 60 kilowatt unit, and with a local business person to help set this up and do the maintenance, do the management, we have this whole thing running, right? So this is the case here. Now it gets very interesting because up to about 18 months, 1.5 years, the whole total cost on the solar farm will be already returned. So that means on the first day of the 19th month, the Chinese solar company has all the costs back. Yeah, they provide all the equipment for free from the very beginning. So on the first day of the 19th month, all the cost has already been collected. And that also means starting from that day, the local business person is making money, is making profit, and this profit will go on for more than 20 years. So that makes business sense. That makes environmental sense, right? That also makes educational sense. And when you see all those kids playing basketball, they're also getting solar supported fans above their heads. At the same time, their parents or their teachers can actually generate like income from this solar farm. And we're talking about one barangay and one basketball court in this barangay. But at the same time, most of the time, each barangay has a school as well, which also has a similar setup of a basketball court. So we're talking about at least 100 kilowatts every single barangay in the Philippines. In each town, there are at least 20-some barangays. So just imagine that kind of size. And it is very easy to set up. It's almost no entry point here, almost no investment for anyone to start. It's just a free equipment, right? Or it's a loan of equipment from China. But in this case, we have a local person to start. So that's why we call this actually the public and private collaboration. The public part is the barangay's public roof and the school's public roof. And the private part is the private Chinese company who's trying to find a market for their supply of solar equipment, and also a private business person in the Philippines. And at the same time, it's such a win-win-win situation. The barangays can save so much money because they can save these 20,000 pesos each month to spend on street lamps to make their streets a little bit safer in the night. And they can spend the money on books for the children, right, in the daycare centers. They can also spend money on medicine for their senior citizens, because those were exactly the stories we heard in these barangays when we were doing the interviews, when we were doing the investigation. So that's my story here. And I hope that you have taken something away from this story, especially some inspiration. Yeah, we don't have to rely on heavy, huge investment that will take a long time to do all the calculation, to do all the assessment, risk assessment and everything. Sometimes things, a small change can start from a very, very small place. But the significance here is that this small change, this small positive change can duplicate very easily. Thank you so much.
Stay there a second. Thanks so much. I mean, that's really, one of these fantastic initiatives. My own personal limited experience with PPPs is that you have, on the public side of things, and no offense or due respect to everybody in this thing, but that finds it very, very difficult to make decisions. And once they've even made decisions, those decisions can change when the sort of formulation of whatever committee you're dealing with changes. So have you had that experience, and how are you dealing with it?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a very, very valid concern. And the reason why we start from a very small place like a barangay, which is the smallest LGU in the Philippines, because it provides a lot of flexibility. If one barangay starts to change, everybody else around the neighboring barangays hear about this story, they get jealous. And then they think, okay, why can't we do that too? And also this creates some kind of competition among local politicians. They want to get that spotlight. They want to get the votes from their constituencies. So that's why actually this kind of flexibility is kind of like steering everything towards a more positive direction. All right, thank you. Thank you.
Tom, can I ask you, how many megawatts have you installed? And if you do a sizing of the broader Philippines, what's the potential of that solution?
Well, first of all, the potential is endless. We're talking about the Philippines. One of the recent Bloomberg stories actually said Philippines is the most potential and attractive market for renewable energy investment. So, I mean, because we're starting from scratch, pretty much. And then when we are talking about the practical cases here, we do have our partner from the Chinese company here, and we are actually starting right now That's why I couldn't prepare a presentation here, because just 2 weeks ago, I was literally on the ground, yeah, talking to the barangay directors or captains. But let's try to imagine, yeah? Okay, thank you.
Sir, are you ready? I'm going to pitch. Thank you for waiting. Apologies for making you wait, but thank you for your patience. We're going to kick off the Q&A with the first question from the floor. And could you go to the microphone so everybody can hear, please? And the people in the front can hear, but the people at the back can't hear you if you don't speak to the microphone. It's just behind you, in the center of the aisle.
Actually, thank you for a nice presentation of all of my colleagues and experts. Thank you very much for presentation, having informations and very interesting topics also. My first question is to Nishi about the grid connection and the individual microhydro projects. I think this is not my question, this is a suggestion that you can directly connect your microhydro to the grid, and you don't need double changeover switches, hardware, cables in every houses. So this can be the one solution, and you can primarily from the very beginning, when grid is connected, you can directly do this one. Just put your power to the grid, and then your connection will be the same. No double meter, no changeover, no cabling, no hardware, no switch gear, everything. This is my suggestion. And,
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, welcome. And for the his research person on say you are floating solar or some solar system, and you can you need say 100 pair of cables or maybe 200 pair of cable. So is the cable interrupted whole 100 pair or 50 pairs together, or one pair or 1, 2, 3, 4 individual cables?
So the undersea cable that's connected to the grid is just two cables. So yeah, and there's very high ship activity around the area. That's why it's prone to breakage every time.
Okay. So what is the one is the solution can be said, if you need say 100 pair of cable, you can put 110 pair of cables. So you can just, when this cable is disrupted, then just replace this one within very quickest time. You don't need to replace with interrupting the system. Okay. So you can just take few minutes, few times to change the points in the 2 points in the generation point and the peaking point. So this will be fine. And then when the system is running, then you can just replace the cable or add the other pair of cables. That's the thing. Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Perhaps something to continue offline, that one. It sounds quite a detailed technical discussion. We have a question from... Sir, can I move on, please? There's another question. Yeah. We can come back to you if there's time afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for wonderful presentation and stories. I really like all the small and beautiful cases that you're making and the big impact. Xiao Wei Liu here from World Energy Council. I'm in charge of Asia Strategic Partnership. Yeah, a question for all the projects that you're doing on the ground. Who are the key stakeholders in making what you're trying to do a success? So is it a government? Is it local government in your case, Tom? And you know, who could be your alliances in making all of your success replicatable? So that's question number one. For the P4I, you know, for that particular initiative, it sounds like driven by Australia government. And where does the money come from? Thank you.
I can answer that last one very quickly. It's from the DFAT budget, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. That's already allocated technical assistance funding. So all DFAT, 100%.
That's by Australian government.
Correct.
Okay. So it's like a foreign aid kind of thing.
It's an ODA program, yeah.
All right,
Official
thank you,
Development Aid.
thank you.
And
Shall
I
I?
think it was to all of you on the.
Yeah, I will start
Dice.
because my answer is super easy, and I did already touch upon it anyway. So it's the public side is definitely, I think the most important stakeholder is the local barangay. They need to have that willingness to lend the public roof, right, to get the sunlight. And then the second most important one is the Chinese company who is trusting us, at least trusting us as an NGO to provide all the solar equipment for free as a loan, believing that in 19 months all the cost will be returned to them. So those two are the most important. But then, of course, at the same time, we need to have a local partner as a business or as an entrepreneur who will be running around to prepare everything and also to do the management, to also help set everything up. So, and also, of course, I do take the claim as well. I think we are very important as an NGO. Thank you.
Shall I?
Siddhartha?
Yeah. So see, any benefit should start with couple of costs, and the costs need to be borne by the government, by the communities, and also some kind of leeway also need to be provisioned by the investors as well. In the case, like the communities need to be open for contributing their land, not at free, but at a commercial value. And then the local governments need to slightly amend their laws because even the local governments are tasked with protecting their communities' ecosystems. So slight modifications required from them. The capacity building of the local communities are also required because that actually gives you an inclusive development because local employment could be generated. And then the government at the federal level, at the country level, probably it just need to be a facilitator. Government job is to govern, it need not do anything else. And the investor probably have to take one step forward. Okay, fine, I'm also going to contribute something, I'll also make profits later. That's it.
Nisha?
Yeah, just to add on, Siddharth. So, ma'am, you have asked about the key stakeholders engaged. So, looking at the different angles, so we have key stakeholders like the community. So they have to have the ownership. So the community is one of the key stakeholder. The other side, the local government. So they are also one of the investor. And at the policy level, obviously the federal government, the nodal agency, or the energy ministry have to be the key stakeholder. And as part of the investor, so yes, as the governing side, the due diligence side, the investor, and for the technical assistant, we, the project developer. So these are the key stakeholders for any successful projects. Thank you.
And Jason, do you want to?
All right, I think I'll build up with Tom and Nisha's response, especially at the community level. So apart from the local government in the area, looking at influential people in those communities. In our experience, it was tribal leaders for indigenous communities, as well as even religious leaders. So as what Tom mentioned, there are basketball courts in all barangays. There's also chapels, churches in even the farthest barangay. So they also have that influence on what their understanding is towards energy and how receptive they are to these kinds of projects.
Siddhartha, I think you had one more.
Just something to add, in the site which we have selected, there are a couple of cattle grazers, couple of, and even the yak movement happens in that place. Though when we have gone for the site, we actually could not go inside the site. People stopped us, asking them the questions, asking us with the questions, and then we were ready with the photographs, how the solar plant look like, that actually leaves the space for the cattle to gaze in, probably under the hot sun. They can even sit under these panels. Even that level of thought process goes into it.
Any more questions from the floor? This gentleman on the left here.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jess Peterson. I'm with Smart Power Myanmar. I was really fascinated to hear your story, Tom, of how you work with communities to set up these microgrids, essentially, or mini grids, perhaps. I was trying to think through, after your presentation, I was trying to think through how this will scale, right? Because it sounds like the economics are very positive, right? And there's a very strong business case. So what happens when this catches on and there are thousands or tens of thousands of villages around the Philippines that want to do this? Because it sounds like right now you and your organization are sort of facilitating the link between the investors from China, essentially, and the local communities and stakeholders and these entrepreneurs who will run these systems, right? But if you're looking at thousands of villages, presumably lots of local entrepreneurs would want to get in on this, and similarly, lots of international investors from China or elsewhere would want in on this. How do you manage this growth and make sure that it happens in an equitable and responsible manner?
Thank you very much. That's a beautiful question and super inspiring. And I would start my answer with a Tagalog phrase people love to use all the time. I would say "sana all." I wish that would be the case, and I wish that would be the case very soon. And of course, not all the places, even for the Philippines, in a tropical island, country, not all places are geographically located for great sunlight. But let's just say all the barangays who do have a lot of sunlight want to do this. One of our pathways along the pathway, I think, or one of our milestones is actually to train up all these entrepreneurs. For example, the very first one can be the mentor for others. And part of the program is actually we take them to China. We take the LGU leaders to China to do workshops there so that it could spread more easily. And then also at the same time, it could spread more easily locally with other people's, so that we call it like train the trainers, right? They come back to the Philippines and then can just build up a new network here. And at the same time, of course, I think Chinese companies would love that at the same time. And like we do have Chinese companies here as well. And if you guys want to provide any input, feel free. I think, right, Peter? We can allow some more comments from the participants here too.
Yeah, of course, yes. That's what we're here for. I'd like to go to a question on the app, and I think this is, well, for any of the panelists, but I would direct it principally to Gilles and perhaps Anisha and Siddhartha. What are the critical requirements to leverage private sector financing for clean energy? How can the partnerships catalyze such investments? Who would like to kick off? So, what are the critical requirements to leverage private sector financing for clean energy? And how can those partnerships catalyze such investments?
Well, critical private financing. So I hear this to be commercial bank financing primarily. Really, the critical requirements when we understand the banks, but banks are not risk takers. This is not their job. Banks is to scale up a solution that's kind of already been proven, whether it's the technology, whether it's the contractual structure, and we can't blame them. And I used to be a banker, so I like shooting at banks, but it's just not their job taking risks, right? But there is a whole other array of funding. Remember the mapping that I showed you for a first of its kind or a second of its kind. So really understanding the requirements it's all about risks and return. You need to have a well-defined risk allocation. And I think, Siddhartha, you showed us how do you structure properly your contracts. Understanding the risks, allocating them to the right entity, mitigating the risks, and put a package to private financing that's well balanced in terms of risks, and the commercial banks can make the return. Siddhartha, Anisha, is that in line with your experience?
Thank you, Jill. So actually, we have a very best example of this. So we have a sustainable energy challenge fund established in Nepal under the government ownership. And as Jill also said, that for the private finance leverage, so the first thing is the technology, proven technology. And the robustness, the transparency of the process, the due diligence, and the confidence of the private sector to invest in certain technology. It means you have to have attractive rate of return on the investment. And as a result, in Nepal, we have leveraged 3.5 times the private fund through our Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund. And so for that also, we are looking for the investor to donate the fund, to leverage their fund in our Sustainable Energy Challenge Fund, to continue this, this vehicle for the private sector investment. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Continuing to what Jules has mentioned, it's about de-risking. It's all about, for me, any unknown aspect is a risk element to it. So my risk premium increases like 50 bps, 100 bps, 300 bps, 500 bps, 600 bps. But then when the communities come together, all the stakeholders, the lady who has asked this, the second question, every community added to the decision making, my risk goes down. But then any reasonable returns over my risk-free investment avenue will actually help mobilizing a lot more investment in place. Apart from, in countries like Africa, countries like Congo, where one of the most fragile regions, but then even that country can attract investors because at least at the local level, the safeguards are in place. And even if the safeguards are not in place, companies, organizations like ISA and MIGA will come in, pitch in. I think Papua New Guinea, kind of economies, fragile regions, actually could be benefited with very less risk premium to add it to the investors' perception, only by accounting for every possible risk in the way. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, just to perhaps, if I can add from my own experience of this, and really important points coming out from the panel. Firstly, what we often see is that developers, people looking for money, go to the wrong institutions to find that money. Gilles has said very strongly, banks do not take risk. That's one thing you have to be aware of. So you need to go to different institution. And I think in doing the project development, what is so key is to understand what the risks are, to use partnerships, as the question implies, to mitigate, to place those risks and price the risks as best you possibly can, and then to actually approach the right institution. And if you don't know the right institution, then you need advice to point you in the direction to that right institution and facilitate the introduction to that right institution. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Any more questions from the floor on this? I'm not seeing any at the moment, but please keep the questions coming on the app, or raise your hand if you would like to ask any questions to the panel. I have a question, I think probably for everybody, and it's something that we haven't really talked about yet: data. Now, we've heard a lot, or I've heard at least a lot about data. We're living in the age of AI, as we all know in the meantime. I think other sessions have indicated the value of data for particularly analyzing risk and reducing risk, and obviously it has a tremendous sort of component and role to play there. But what I'd like to hear from our panelists is the experience you've had with data in the project preparation process. And for me, again, it's a double-edged sword, because the more you know, the more dangerous things become, almost. The risk almost increases. But of course, the more data you have, the more you understand those risks, the more you're able to price them and mitigate them, perhaps. But I suppose my questions are, for the purpose of project development, how do we collect more data, benchmarking and things like that? Who needs to collect that data? And how do we make it available to the project developers and to the investors that need it most, without breaching things like confidentiality? It's a big issue, of course, with data. So your experience around this whole area of data collection, data use, and data propagation, am I right in thinking it's valuable also in the project development process? And do you have any suggestions for how we get more of it and how we propagate more of it to where it's needed? Jason, you look as though you want to start. Great.
Yeah, since my presentation is really grounded on data. So data is very important, especially how we collect it on the ground. So we also have a lot of projects with the government. One thing that I'd like to share is really how are we going to use that data, not just for the purposes of clean energy investments, but also for other uses. So we have one project as well in, I think, 4 barangays that had an automated weather station for us to collect solar and wind data. So these are situated in schools. The school administrators help us with maintaining the site, as well as they use it for announcements if the heat wave is very strong. So they also use that data, as well as the LGU. So there's that collective use of that data, might it be for any kind of purpose, because the more we make it available, the more uses we can see and the more opportunities it can open up.
Thank you. Siddhartha.
No, it's very funny. Data, I basically deal in solar and biomass. Wind, I do not do it because there is not available, no sufficient data. But then solar, there is a trend. We do have the data, the actual data for the last almost 20 years, and then simulated data for the next 25, 30 years. You have lots of databases right from Metronom, SolarGS. But then there is a trend that in India, with a sample size of around 17, 18 projects, the irradiation has been going down because of climate change. So my data may not be 100% valid because my delta, my climate variability has increased, right? That actually affects my project planning. That adds up to my risk, right? The second thing is that despite of having all this data in place, even the data at the grassroots level, what Jason was mentioning, see, in India, the monsoon starts sharply on June 6th or June 9th. And if your project is planned to be set up in during those months, probably, for example, you have got your modules on place on site and you have got inverter on site, but you also need manpower to set these plants up, right? For a 10 megawatt power plant, you need around 110, 120 unskilled labor to actually get these modules on ground. But then in the monsoon periods, everyone go to their respective farms for agriculture, You'll not get manpower to do it. Even that's a data point. And when if the rain, normal rain, it's fine. If it's a hailstorm rain, my equipment could get damaged, adding to my project planning. So your project planning should also depend on your seasonal variations at micro level, without which it's just superficial. Then probably projects will not go that way.
Gilles.
I'll give you an interesting example on using data. You know that one of the key criticism of solar or wind is the intermittency and the impact that it has on the grid. Hence, past a certain percentage of penetration, utilities tend to be pushing back for more renewables. What we are starting to see, notably in India, not so much in Southeast Asia, is the combining of battery storage with renewable energy generation. So we call it hybrid dispatchable units, and it's combining solar and wind and batteries. But in order to optimize battery, it's not so much about slapping a 2 hours battery on a solar plant and say, yep, I have an integrated. It's really about using data to optimize the size of the system. How many megawatt of solar do I need? How many megawatt of wind do I need? And what's the size of the battery that I need to put together to actually give you a dispatchable plant that will give you a capacity factor of 90% during the peak hours, 6 to 8 in the morning, 6 to 8 in the evening. There's been a few examples of tenders in India, what we call the FDRE tenders, where the utility requires 100% certainty of power during the peak hour in the morning and the evening. And that's what a solar plant cannot do on its own. So people are now using data and very detailed software to help them design
how many megawatt of solar do I need? How many megawatt of wind do I combine it with? Because wind and solar combine each other very well on capacity factor, and having a battery to make sure that I get the 100%. And with the right use of software, you basically use the irradiation, and then you run hundreds and hundreds of scenarios, something you cannot do by hand, right? Yeah. So only the software will tell you the optimize. And if you look at the results of the tender, you get 10, 20% delta between different bids. So using the data with the software to actually reduce the cost of renewables and give you dispatchable renewables, not intermittent. So that's a very powerful use of data and something that hopefully will resolve the intermittency.
And this fixed and dispatchable renewable energy tenders, with the markets being matured, data actually plays a very crucial role. The delta need to be very minimum. When you are, in Indian terms, we call the least denomination of monetary value is a paisa. Okay, so, and in India, you get decimal of paisa competition between each tender. Data plays a very vital role, and the reliable data, multiple sources with maximum variability, with which gives me provisioning for delta, that actually plays the key.
Indeed. I'm going to offer one last question to the audience if they want it. It's Thursday morning, obviously, and we're all waiting for coffee, so it's a difficult sell, but the time is running here. I really wanted to get 2 more questions in. I'm not sure whether I can get both, but I'm going to do this one anyway, very quickly. It was occurring to me last night as I was thinking about this, and throughout the conference I've had a number of conversations about the volatility in the economic and geopolitical environment at the moment. Is any of this development work and preparation work that we're doing at the moment possible in this environment? Well, how do we deal with this volatile environment? 1-sentence answers, please.
I can start. I have a perfect example here. This year, 2025, is the 50th anniversary for China-Philippines diplomatic relationship. And we know China and the Philippines haven't really had the most stable or, like a friendly relationship in the most recent years, especially. However, this year is very important, and from both sides, we are seeing a lot of celebrations. And one of the topics for this celebration is actually collaboration on renewable energy, especially for the future generations. We are sending high school graduates from the Philippines to China to study for 4 years. And these students are constantly talking to the Philippine embassy in China. And also we are constantly talking to the Chinese embassy here in the Philippines, because even with China's Belt and Road Initiative, one of the major pillars for BRI is people-to-people connection. So when it comes to people, genuine connecting with each other, that probably overtakes any kind of like cross-border geopolitical tensions. Thank you.
Nisha, Gilles, any thoughts on this?
Well, I think we're past the inflection point or the tipping point that all these transition investments, clean energy investments, they are economic in their own rights. We don't necessarily need subsidies or so. Yeah, the environment is volatile, but the transition in Southeast Asia is happening, and it will continue to happen. And you look at raising financing is frustrating. It is difficult. There's no lack of different sources, but it's very difficult to fathom, which one is appropriate for your development. And these are the kind of events here. There's always a good colleague or a good acquaintance who will be able to help, direct you to the right sources of funding. So it is there. The Australian government will continue the program. There's many other donor programs and TA. PFAN is there as a network of advisors. So just keep going. There's no turning back. Keep going.
Great. Well, on that note, I'm really going to draw things to a close. I was going to ask the panel one last question about what is the one thing that they think contributes to excellence. But I think that question is a bit obsolete in the light of the discussion that we've had, because what everybody's been saying is that we need everything. And it's about everything that we've been talking about for the last 3-4 days. and I'm sure we're going to be talking about it for the rest of the day and in tomorrow into the plenary session. The real question is not so much what we need, it's how we bring it together, how we integrate it. It's about the partnerships, and it's about working together and making that integration as seamless as possible and as accessible as possible for the people that need the services that we're providing. That's our 2 cents from this panel 4.3. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you to my wonderful panel, and thank you to ADB for having us.